Hi guys, Terry here. Hey, I was recently asked some questions about the Mosaic Moments system. So if you recall, this is grid paper. So it's a standard 12 by 12 size sheet, and it's got the lines drawn on it. So I'll have links to their website where you can purchase this paper. And then when they first came up with this, you would actually use an X-Acto knife and cut your photographs with that X-Acto knife to fit these squares. So now they've since come up with dies, and the dies look like this. Now I've placed my dies on magnetic sheets, and then I simply traced inside here so that I can remember where they go on the magnet. So one of the questions I was asked was, so of course the squares are 1 inch by 1 inch, right? And what happens is, as you go up in size, the dies are made such that you can make squares, rectangles. This is set C. So for example, if I wanted to cover up 5 squares by 4 squares, see, I can either go this way or I can go this way. And notice that it covers up the squares on the grid. So for example, if I would take one of these dies, let's say I would want to cut a 3 by 3. Here's a 3 by 3, so I use the square set to cut this. This would cover up 3 of the squares, 3 of the 1 inch squares each way. Okay, so the idea is that you would design your page, take your photos. What I do is I take my photos and I kind of start planning. So we recently went to a Broadway show, so I started printing my pictures. And I thought that I would use one that is the 2 of us at the event. So I thought that was a really important picture. So I kind of start with my most important picture, which to me it was us, a picture of us at the event. So I want to do that. And before the event we went to dinner. So I know I want to show the restaurant that we went to, so I might put these over here. So just knowing that I want to have pictures of the restaurant, I start looking at the photographs. So here's one where really it's the bar that we went to for dinner. And then knowing that I kind of want to go down the side of the page with this, I start asking myself, how trimmed down can I make this photograph, but yet still tell the story, right? So I thought that I could, down the side here, I could cover up a 4 by 2 and still have enough of the photograph to tell the story, but cover up that part. So I'm just kind of laying it on the corner of the page here. Of course, the photograph is going to cover more squares than what my final cutout is going to do, but I'm kind of laying it in the corner, reminding myself, okay, I'm going to have this one. I've got another picture here that I'm thinking what I can do is I can cut out a 2 by 2, knowing that I'm kind of shooting for it to be 2 inches wide. So I can do this one and I could do this one. So what I would do is, I'm thinking I can do that one and the food that he's eating, and then I can do this one sideways, so that would work. And I could have that one there. So that leaves a little gap here. So what I could decide to do is either use some pattern paper to fill in that gap. Like something that I might do on that gap is, I might put the date down here on a little 1 by 2 piece and have that was June 2023. So that's an idea. Or I could cut this, instead of cutting this one 2 by 2, maybe I do it 2 by 3. but I kind of don't want to have the rest of the table in there. I think the 2-inch square works, and I like the idea of having the date down here. So that's what I'm thinking. These photographs will be over here, and that'll work. Now, sometimes when you print a picture, if you notice, and this is hard to show, but if you notice, when you do, so if you're printing 4x6 pictures, when you've got these bigger ones, sometimes what you have to do is, it's going to be 4 inches wide, but 4 inches wide does not cover up the 4 inches, because there's an 1/8 of an inch between each of the squares. So in other words, the squares are 1 inch wide, right? If I take my little 1-inch square here, and let me zoom in. If I take my little 1-inch square, if my picture is actually 2 inches, that's not enough to cover, because I need an inch here, an inch here, and an 1/8 inch in between there. So what happens for some of these bigger blocks is you've got to use the, in order to cut the border, you need to use the layering piece. Okay, so you need to use the layering piece. Let me show you here. I'm not explaining it very well. So I'm going to cut a pattern piece of paper, or a solid piece. So I've got this piece here, and then when I cut my photograph, it's actually going to be, let me show you this way. So this would be enough to cover up all those squares, because we want to go over here and cover up these lines, but yet we're going to leave a gap, right? So then this piece, when I cut my photograph, because I've only got 4 inches to spare for my photograph, it actually needs to go on a layering piece to make it fit. Okay, so if you didn't follow that, I'll show you again when we're putting the page together. So suffice it to say, there's some dies that are exactly on the squares, and then there's other dies that let you layer when you need to. Okay, so let's take this picture here. Another thing that I learned when I was printing my pictures was, sometimes if you print the picture borderless on your 4x6, sometimes it'll cut off, depending on how your phone sized your photograph, it might cut off some of the picture. So that's what happened with this picture. When this picture was something I downloaded from Facebook, and I think it was more of a square picture. When I printed it 4x6, I lost like that much of the picture. So I decided to print it on my selfie with a border. And then that gave me the luxury of having more of the picture proportioned and smaller, such that I could use this 3x3 die. Still capture enough of the story. I wanted to get the date, the title of the show, and the playbill in there. Okay, so I'll cut that, and I'm planning on putting these down this side. So this one will be a 3x3, so that one will go there. And then I have a nice picture I took of the inside of the building. And again, knowing that I'm going to make these 3 inches wide, I'm kind of planning my layout here. So that one's going to be a 4x3, and then that leaves me a 3x3 left over. So I printed this one again with the borders, and I'm going to capture enough of that. This is the ceiling in the theater. So that one will be down here. So those worked out perfectly, that there will be a 3x3, a 4x3, and a 3x3 down the side. Okay, so that's starting to leave me a little strip there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill in some of these squares that I don't have a photograph for. Another thing that you want to do is save the scraps. After you cut your pictures, save all those little scraps, because sometimes it works out that you do have little 1-inch pieces. And you can take your little 1-inch piece and cut the scraps. and those make a really neat pattern too. So keep the scraps as you're cutting your photographs. But I'm thinking this is looking pretty good. I've got my 3 pictures I'm going to use down the side, and I've got my 3 pictures over here. I've got an open space, but I'll probably journal. This show was called To Kill a Mockingbird, and I kind of want to write my thoughts, and I'll print that on a piece of cardstock using Word. I'll type that up and I'll know what I want my space to be there, and then I can trim that down to fit on there. So I'll probably put the title across here and then my journaling, depending on how big my title is. Maybe I'll put Broadway series, cut that on my Cricut, and then I could put my journaling down here. So let me cut my pictures and show you kind of what I'm thinking this layout's going to look like. Okay, so I've got my die, and this one's tricky because it's a 4x4, so I want this to stay in position here. So I'm going to tape it with some purple tape and just keep this on the edge of the photograph. And keep in mind, if you mess up, you can always print the picture again. So I'm lining that up and I'm taping it. And then I'm going to run that through my die machine. So when I'm gluing down the pictures, if you'll notice that the lines are drawn on the top and the bottom, or top and the left hand side of the squares. So what you'll want to do is you'll want to put your glue on your photo, and it doesn't take a lot, it's not going to go anywhere. Put a little bit on the top and the bottom, and then what I'm doing is I'm lining it up with this top corner. So I'm putting the corner of my picture in the corner of that, and then I'm just making sure that I've got the lines covered up. I'm bringing this, lining it up with the corner, and then bringing this up here to the tops of the lines. And I'm just making sure that these lines are covered and these lines are covered. And when you do that, you'll have it on there pretty square. And it's nice to use either repositionable tape or even the permanent tape. It's not permanent yet, so I can still peel this up and scoot it if I need to. But just by putting it in this corner and lining it up on both those lines, it's going to be perfectly lined up over here. And then when you go to put your next picture on, same thing. You're just doing it in that, and it's going to make that little gap between the photos. And that's what the mosaics is all about. Just getting a lot of pictures on the page and perfectly lined up. Okay, so I've got my pictures cut. So one thing that I'll mention too is it's surprising how many photos you can fit on a mosaic layout. So that's one of the things that I love about it. It's just incredible how many more. Like, I'll probably go back through my photos and see if there's more pictures that I can put on here. I might find a picture of the cast or something. So that's one thing that I just love about mosaics. Imagine if I did a 2-page layout, how many photographs that I would need. So what I also recommend is don't glue anything down. Even though I've kind of got the idea here, you know, I don't know exactly what I want to do yet. So I like the polka dots. I like the, you know, the tablecloth there. So don't glue anything down as you're working on it, because things will evolve. Matter of fact, maybe even take a break and come back to it, because you might see something that you want to add or move on the page. So keep in mind your layers. You know, sometimes you can trim a picture down. You know, if I had to, I might have been able to make this thinner and fit it on a 3x4. But I like the idea of adding a border for a pop of color on the page. So a lot of things you can do. So let me just mention too, you can buy their paper with the lines already on it, but I've also found that you can use your Cricut machine or your Brother Scan and Cut, you know, any cutting machine that you have the pens for. You can download that pattern and draw it on a piece of paper. I like supporting their method of printing the lines on the paper already for you. So I've got a variety of all the different colors pages with the lines on it. But I did want you to know that that existed. And then also, the dies are pretty expensive. I mean, they're not cheap. And because you're buying 5 sets of dies, they have a set that's A through E, so that you have every combination of all the different sizes on there. That can be expensive. So I want you to know that you can do this rather inexpensively. So let me grab a photograph and show you how you can use your personal trimmer to cut. Okay, so this kind of takes us back to in the olden days when we first started using mosaics. You would actually take a ruler and lay it on here and use your X-Acto knife to cut it. So as handy as the dies are, sometimes if I don't want to take my die cutter to a crop, then I will just cut using my trimmer. So what I've done is, knowing that the grid paper is spaced 1 inch, 2 1/8, 3 1/4, and 4 3/8. So knowing that that is the measurements for those squares, if I'm going to make a 1 by 1 inch piece, I know to cut it 1 inch by 1, and that will make my piece there. Or I can cut it 2 1/8 by whichever piece that I want to do here. So let me show you. So for example, this piece here, if you remember, this was I call it a 2 by 4, right? It's not exactly 4 inches because it's got the 1/8 in between here. Matter of fact, it's got 3/8. Okay, so to cut this, so here's my original photograph. So I'm going to cut this 2 wide. I'm saying 2, but it's actually 2 1/8. So I'm going to lay this on my, let me just cut this piece off here. I'm going to lay this on my trimmer such that I'm looking at this little white dot. So knowing it's 2 1/8 wide, I'm positioning my photograph between the blade and that little dot. So I'm going to do this. You can see where the dies would be more exact, but I can do this knowing that I've got my dot here in the side of the blade. So I'm simply going to turn my picture around, because I spaced it such that that's the width that I want. Okay, so there's my width. It was 2, or actually 2 1/8, right? So now I'm going to cut it. I know that I need it to be 4, and it's not exactly 4, it's 4 3/8. So what I probably would do is, I probably would cut the bottom of this where the photograph ends, just to start with. And then I can say, okay, how much of the end do I want to chop off, and how much do I need to keep on the top here? Okay, I'm going to put this by the dot. So I'm knowing that I need to be between the 1/4 inch and the 1/2 inch. That's where my little white dot is. I can cut that top off. So that's how I manually used my trimmer to cut. And you can see it worked. It worked just fine. So, you know, do you need the dies? I'd say the dies are quicker because you can line that up on your photograph. You can take that piece, you know, simply line it up where you want when you're cutting, and you're just sitting over there with your die machine cranking them out. So I think that works well, but I do think a very inexpensive alternative is using your personal trimmer, and then just notate on here those squares. And then you can make it any dimension that you need to by putting your piece in here and cutting it to those dimensions. So you know, if you can afford to do the dies, great, but this works just as well. And when I go to a crop, this is what I take, because I'm usually not cutting anything too much longer than this. The next one is 5 1/2, and I would do that on my larger trimmer, but usually I'm trying, if I'm doing a mosaics page, it's because I've got a lot of pictures from a vacation or an event where I want to just cover that page with photographs. So the personal trimmer works great. So just a pointer. I'll have links to all the products that I mentioned in this video. I'll have those links in my blog post. And I hope this helped you out. I hope it helped you learn what's possible with the mosaics. And like I said, I'll have a link to their website. They also have a lot of instructional videos too, so I'll have those linked. So thanks guys, and I hope you have a great week. Bye now.